Thank you.
So guys, we're live.
Acho que já tá.
We have a new episode of Aceita Bitcoin, which in English would translate to the Bitcoin Cult, a special name we give to our Portuguese Bitcoin podcast. Certainly for the Portuguese maximalist community. And today we have a special guest, one of the most known people in the space. We name him David Barton. I think I spelled your name right.
Daniel Batten.
Daniel Barton, okay. And when it comes
Directly
to
from the other side of the world, right? New Zealand, right?
New Zealand, oh, you're talking to us from New
Yeah.
Zealand. Wow.
I'm in Costa Rica today.
Oh, okay.
What time is it there right now?
It's
4 p.m.
3:07.
So, Daniel, on the 28th of April, there was a problem here in Portugal, in Spain. There was a blackout.
Just Abjad, sorry. I think it's just a good idea just for Daniel to introduce himself and to give a quick background.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
Just for the people that don't know you and what you're doing. I've been following your work and it's awesome to see what you're doing. Just a brief overview.
Yeah, sure. So my name is Daniel Batten, and I'm a climate tech investor. And I also run a fund called CH4 Capital, which specializes in methane mitigation from landfills, and we use Bitcoin mining rigs as the off-taker for that power.
Nice. That's really cool, man. Wow.
Can you tell us a little bit of your Bitcoin journey? So I know that you were a Bitcoin skeptic, right? In the beginning, so you thought that Bitcoin was gonna boil the oceans and all that kind of stuff, and then you started putting in the work. You dig into what Bitcoin really is, right? And then you found out that actually this might be the piece of the puzzle that we were looking for, right?
Correct. Yeah, when I first looked at Bitcoin, I had a reflexive negative reaction to it because when I first saw it, I couldn't see the utility of it beyond being a speculative asset. And I saw that it used a lot of energy. And like a lot of other people who have environmental concerns, I thought, well, that doesn't sound like a good combination. It has no utility to humanity other than speculation. And it uses a lot of energy. That's not good. And it was really only by luck that I had some friends, and one in particular, who challenged that perspective. And that prompted me to do my own research. So I started to understand Bitcoin mining before I understood Bitcoin, actually. So I looked at all the different for and against arguments with Bitcoin. And very quickly I came to this understanding that actually a lot of the arguments against Bitcoin, they seem to be put out by people who have a vested interest in Bitcoin not succeeding. For example, one of the prime sources was an employee from a central bank, which central banks get disintermediated by Bitcoin. And having come from the technology adoption, I've been an entrepreneur for a number of years and seen technology growth curves. I knew enough about technology to know that when you have a disruptive technology, you always disrupt someone by definition. And the people you're disrupting are not just going to lie down and say, welcome to the world, new technology, my time is done. No, they're going to fight using everything possible. And so that got me thinking, okay, maybe this information is not as reliable. Then I started to look into the claims of environmental benefits. And I was also a bit skeptical because I heard things such as it stabilizes grids and it can incentivize the monetization of wasted renewable energy. It sounded good in theory, but I couldn't see any examples of it happening at scale, and it wasn't being quantified. But the more research I did, the more I started to realize actually you can quantify this, and I can start to quantify some of it. So I started to build some models of what Bitcoin's energy mix was and found out that it was higher than a lot of other models were saying because hash rate had migrated out of areas such as Kazakhstan towards greener grids such as Paraguay and Ethiopia and the Texas grid. And at the same time that there was starting to emerge quite a lot of different real use cases for Bitcoin that was helping to stabilize grids. Grid operators were confirming that that was the case. And also a lot of renewable energy companies were using it. So there was no way they would have an economic incentive to use Bitcoin if it wasn't solving a real problem. So clearly this wasn't greenwash, because these were not Bitcoin companies that were using it. These were renewable energy companies such as TEPCO in Japan or Deutsche Telekom in Germany, who were using Bitcoin specifically to monetize their stranded renewable energy. So that got me very curious. And the more I researched it, the more I realized, actually, you know what? This is not part of the problem at all. This is actually fundamentally a part of the climate solution. It's helping to mitigate methane, stabilize grids, and incentivize the build out of the renewable grid all at the same time.
Oh, that's awesome. I'm gonna have to send this podcast to my cousin, because actually he's an engineer, but I mean, I've been trying to get him into Bitcoin for quite a long time, and I mean, he's still a skeptic. He's still saying that I'm contributing to global warming, because I'm working in the mining space, as you know. So yeah, hopefully we can demystify a lot of BS that is still around, unfortunately. Abjad, go ahead. You have some questions prepared for Daniel.
Yeah. We
let me
brought
just.
him here.
Can I just
Yeah. For sure.
kind of picking up where Daniel touched. Have you seen the projects like Gridless in Africa?
I haven't visited them, but I know Eric well. We chat a lot, and so I have been following that very closely. They have already brought energy to over 20,000 villagers that's villagers, not distinct villages, in rural Africa. So that's a lot of people who were in energy poverty who now have electricity as a direct result of his project. So just for people who don't know, what they do is you have microgrids who are proposed as a solution for when you have a large rural population, and a centralized grid is not the solution because it doesn't make economic sense. So people have known for a while that these renewable microgrids that run on micro hydro are the solution. But the problem is that they don't make economic sense either, because most of the population, they only need the electricity for a short portion of the day. They don't need it at night. They don't need it during the day. So if you have hydro, a lot of that hydro.
For a developer, sorry to interrupt you. Just so probably people may not understand this. From a developer point of view, or an investor point of view, or a company that works in the space, it doesn't make sense to build even if it is a micro hydro on that place, because there's no demand. So there's a couple people, they want a light bulb or a TV 2 hours a day, and so it doesn't make sense for them as investors or companies to do it, right? And so that's where the gridless guys they come in and do it, because they utilize the stranded energy, or otherwise the excess energy, they use it to mine Bitcoin. That's why it makes sense, right?
Yeah. I was getting to that. So basically, Gridless will come in and they will say, look, we can be a customer of that energy whenever it's not being used. So in the middle of the day, in the middle of the night, we'll use the energy. That gives more revenue, which means it gets a faster return on investment. And then when the village needs that energy, they switch off immediately, so the village is always prioritized. So the village doesn't lose anything. In fact, they get cheaper power. The project pays off its investment sooner, which means that's why Gridless have been able to do now 6 projects, and they're looking to do many more. So it's a potential solution where you could scale it, and you could start to actually deliver energy at scale to parts of rural Africa that otherwise would never have made economic sense. So it's a really very interesting model that they're using.
Yeah,
it seems to be working out, right?
Yeah, but I think it's mind blowing just to see like the impact of Bitcoin in the world, because I bet that Satoshi, when he designed the Bitcoin protocol, he never thought that it could reach. I think he never thought that Bitcoin could have this sort of impact when it comes to mining as well. I don't know if you guys agree with me, but it's just mind-blowing.
Yeah, I think these are all very accidental benefits.
We call it accidental. Well, what was not accidental was what happened on the 28th of April here in Portugal. we went through a blackout, a national blackout. Spain went through it as well. Can you give us a brief description of what happened in your point of view?
I think many of the people in Portugal probably know possibly better than I do, but from the outside, there's two things. Number one, it's not immediately clear what the root cause is, so there's different ideas. What we do know is that there were widespread blackouts, and there's many reasons that blackouts can occur. Blackouts can occur because there might be an earthquake and you might have transmission line damage, so there might be a natural disaster. They may be damaged because there's old equipment that's aging that hasn't been maintained well. That happened in Auckland a number of years ago in New Zealand, where I'm from, where there was very poor maintenance, and that resulted in a core cable delivering electricity to a whole city cracking and breaking, and the city was blacked out. They can black out because suddenly a grid operator has to constantly balance supply and demand of electricity. And it's very unforgiving. So if suddenly you have the demand rises, but you don't have enough generation, that can cause a blackout. So the grid operator, if that occurs, they have to either quickly reduce demand, right? Or they need to quickly increase the supply. And in the past, when they've had more fossil fuel-based electricity, whilst that has resulted in grids with higher carbon intensity, it's also given the grid operators more flexibility because it's relatively straightforward to increase generation capacity at a coal plant or at a gas plant. It's harder to do with what's impossible to do with a wind plant or with solar energy. You can't ask the sun to shine more. You can't ask the wind to suddenly start blowing more. So that's another reason. But the other reason, which not many people know about, is you can actually have the opposite problem, which is suddenly demand drops rapidly and generation stays the same. So you can have too little demand or too much demand. Both of them can cause either a brownout or a blackout where the entire grid or a portion of the grid fails. And then another reason is atmospheric fluctuations. And this is one of the possible causes that's been investigated in Portugal, in the Iberian Peninsula, is that when suddenly you have an area of land and an area of atmosphere that goes from cold to hot very fast, then it causes some very interesting vibrations to happen in the atmosphere, which can have a ripple effect on high voltage transmission lines and can cause oscillations in the frequency. So those frequency oscillations that are caused by atmospheric circumstances, they can cause grid instability as well. And the interesting thing there is that as climate change becomes more severe, you're more likely to get freak weather events, number one, which means if you're in Texas, it can mean you get both flavors. You either get ice storms in winter or you get heat waves in the summer, both of which cause more power consumption because everyone either turns on their heating or their cooling. And both of that causes a rise in demand very rapidly. And that can cause an instability in the grid. But the other thing is you can have these very rapid heating events that cause these unique atmospheric conditions, which then can cause frequency fluctuations on the grid. So these events are going to become more prevalent, not less prevalent. Now, we don't know, and it's too early to speculate what caused the blackout in Portugal and in Spain. But depending on what was the cause, then there's a number of potential solutions to it.
Yeah, well, at least what we know so far, at least what's been coming out, I think the problem originated in Spain and then propagated to Portugal. So the issue started in Spain, and then our power plants, stations, whatever the name is, they shut down as a prevention to not screw up downstream. At least that's the general conclusion until now. So there's no definite cause yet, so it's not known. I'm pretty sure, or that we will never know, or it will be some random shenanigans. Because also what we know is that Spain was using, I think, for about a week, like 100% renewable energy, and the issue with Portugal was that for us it was economically cheaper to buy from Spain than to produce our own, because we shut down the coal mines and the coal power plants and gas. I think we shut down the gas one also, and so it was economically made more sense to buy from Spain. And we were, I think, at the time we were about 40% reliant on Spain. That's why when they crashed, our side crashed also to prevent other issues. I'm not sure if I'm
that makes sense.
Saying this correctly.
And that's very common.
The other thing in Spain, sorry, just to finish. The other thing in Spain, I think it was an isolated case. Cable just burned down, I guess, or a tower burned down. I don't think it's related.
Yeah.
But as Daniel was saying, the problem might not be the production side of things, but the load balancing problem, right?
There's a number of possibilities, yes. I'll give you an example. So in Texas in 2021, when there were widespread blackouts, billions of dollars of business was lost, people lost their lives, and the grid operator lost his job. And the root cause there, when they did the diagnosis, they did find it. It was in response to a specific freak nature event, and that was a winter storm, which was more severe than they'd ever had. And that led to two things occurring. The first thing that happened was, of course, you had a winter storm, so demand increased. So suddenly everyone turned on their heating all at the same time. Now, it may have been able to withstand that, but what happened in parallel was that a lot of both the fossil fuel generation and some of the renewables, they weren't adequately protected against extreme weather. So blades froze. Elements of the gas turbines did not withstand the extreme cold temperatures. And so at the same time as demand increased, you also lost generation. And that caused a wild fluctuation in the frequency of the grid, and that caused the blackouts, and they couldn't recover in time. And there was not enough load balancing. So there's a number
according to the Spain authorities, I think they lost 15 gigawatts in
that's a lot of energy. Yeah.
Like in 10 seconds or so, or whatever.
I think it was 60% of the total demand. 60%.
Yeah, so to give an idea of how much 15 gigawatts is, so
gigawatts, like the
that's enough to. That's enough to power like millions of people. That's a massive amount of energy, absolutely gargantuan. And so you're very unlikely to have. So there's different solutions if you lose that much energy altogether. And so traditionally people have said, well, if you have more renewables on the grid, you need to have more batteries to counteract them. And batteries have a number of advantages. One thing with batteries is they're very, very fast to respond. So if they detect a fluctuation in frequency, they can deliver power back to the grid within less than 100 milliseconds. So very, very fast, which is what's required. So that's a positive. They can also supply power for quite a long time. They can discharge for over 4 hours, or if you discharge less power, they can discharge more slowly. Now, could they discharge enough for 15 gigawatts all at once? Very unlikely. So they can't discharge all that power straight away. So what else could you do if you have a sudden radical drop of that level?
Is there even like technology for batteries to store that much, not the 15 gigawatt, but that much energy? So I have.
You need a huge amount of batteries, put it that way, and it would be massively expensive. And but the other issue is you can't just suddenly discharge all the power from a battery straight away. It's going to take time. So if you have a massive shortfall immediately, you can't respond to that level with batteries. The only way to respond to that is you'd need an equally massive decrease. Two ways. You have a massive decrease in demand, or you have a massive delivery of new power generation through backup power. But to have 15 gigawatts of backup, generally that would, okay, here's the scenario. To have 15 gigawatts of backup, where are you going to get that immediate power from? There's only one way, and that's get gas peaker plants. So you'd have to have 15 gigawatts of gas peaker plants, which would cost you tens of billions of dollars, possibly over $100 billion to have that much in the background. Plus that would work directly against your decarbonization goals. Plus someone's got to pay for those gas peaker plants. And what they do is they idle all through the year, just for the maybe up to 6% of the year when they're required to instantly deliver power. Because in order to deliver power instantly, which is what they'd have to do, they need to be idling right through the year. And if they're idling through the year, they're burning methane, natural gas all through the year, and they're having a carbon footprint all through the year. And at the same time, there's a number of environmental organizations who are also trying to get rid of gas peaker plants at the same time. So you have some big problems here. You have, on one hand, the well-intentioned desire to transition to renewable energy, solar and wind chiefly. At the same time, you have the desire to remove gas peaker plants, which is actually one of the things that grid operators use to counterbalance variable renewable energy. So the more solar and wind you have on the grid owners actually want that reassurance. So if the wind goes behind, stops blowing, or the sun goes behind a cloud, they want to have those gas peaker plants to be able to fire up to deliver power back quickly.
I think that's one of the issues people don't understand. That, and I do think I agree with you. It's a good goal to have more renewables and take whatever the sun and the wind and whatnot have to offer. But that comes with a cost.
That's the issue.
That comes with a cost, right? The power delivered from renewables is not constant. It's not a constant. Is peaking and sometimes it doesn't even match the demand. So you have, when you have high supply, you don't have demand, and so you need something in the back to keep the frequency stable, right?
So that's traditionally what's been done. And in my mind, there's two things that, and this is where it gets very political, because if you talk to people on the political left, they'll generally prioritize the decarbonization of the grid. If you talk to people on the political right, they'll generally say, well, we don't care so much about that, but we care more about energy stability, and fossil fuels are going to do a better job of that. And then we get this kind of debate that goes on between the two. But I think there's ways where we can get what both sides want. And the interesting thing is, it didn't used to be this way. Like in the 1980s in the UK, it was actually the other way around, where the political right, it was actually Margaret Thatcher in the 80s, who was one of the first politicians in the world, who was arguing for the need to have more solar and wind generation to decarbonize, to release the UK's reliance on coal. It was a political left who said, we need more coal, forget about this ridiculous newfangled renewable generation. We need jobs, we need coal. Coal is good. And so these tribal affiliations have switched completely, but we still have two parties who are arguing against each other based on these different ideological aims. Now, both are important. In fact, we need three things. And this is what's called the energy trilemma. We need to rapidly decarbonize grids. We need to keep them stable and have energy security. And we also need energy affordability. So how do you deliver all three? It's a really challenging phenomenon.
What's your take on nuclear?
We'll come to that in a minute, but I just want to finish this thought. So it's incredibly challenging because how are you going to do that? How on earth are you going to maximize? Because the moment you place more solar and wind on a grid, it's intermittent power. And intermittent power brings new challenges to a grid owner, a grid operator, that are undeniable. You no longer have what's called inertia. So you don't have that ability where, say, for example, you have thermal power and suddenly you lose it. You have this thing called inertia because the turbines keep on going. And even though you no longer have that power, the fact you still have the turbines going gives you some precious microseconds or milliseconds more time to be able to institute your backup plan. Whereas with solar and wind power, you don't have any of what's called inertia. I won't get into the technicalities of synchronous versus asynchronous generation, but basically you lose that ability. So you have to respond even faster, and it's very challenging, in fact. So this is why Bitcoin mining offers a solution. And really, of all the different things I've looked at, as I say, yes, battery's part of it, but it's not all of it. It can't discharge immediately. It's only got 4 hours of power. It's very expensive as well. And that expense is often borne by the consumer, which endangers energy affordability. And so what Bitcoin mining does, and where it's very unique, is number one, it's not an expense which is borne by the grid operator. It's borne by the Bitcoin mining companies themselves. So it doesn't cost anything. So that's an advantage. Second thing is it actually replaces cost, because now you don't have to invest in gas peaker plants anymore, because rather than responding to a peak weather event with firing up a gas peaker plant, Bitcoin mining companies function like an inverse gas peaker plant. So rather than getting more generation, you just lower the demand instantly. And this has happened in Texas, not 15, but 3 gigawatts of energy, boom, within 500, sometimes 300 milliseconds, they can power down and stabilize a grid instantly. So that's a tremendous advantage. And what that's enabled Texas to do is Texas now has more renewable energy than California.
Wow.
They're growing at a faster rate than any state in the US. It's phenomenal what they've done.
I think they have 70%, right?
It's not that high, no, but it's growing very fast. It's higher than California, and probably more like about 40% at the moment, but it's grown from nothing in a very short space of time. And there's a couple of reasons. It's gone from, in the last 4 years, from 80 gigawatts to 140 gigawatts of renewable generation, which is phenomenal. And partly that's favorable policies, but also partly that's because they've had, in the last 4 years, Bitcoin mining, which has allowed it to continue to grow at a very rapid pace, where often what you see with renewable development is it starts to grow rapidly. And then as you get some of these issues with needing more gas peaker plants, with grid instability issues, with counterbalancing the variability of renewable energy, then it starts to decline. But Texas has been able to continue at a very, very fast rate because of two things. Number one, those Bitcoin mining companies have been able to use the energy that would otherwise be wasted because it's produced at a time of day that other people don't want it. And secondly, when the grid operator needs the Bitcoin mining company to power down, they can power down instantly, so that if the sun stops or goes behind a cloud or the wind stops blowing, you immediately have the Bitcoin mining companies that can come off the grid and help stabilize it and deliver that power to other people. So it's a case study. And if for anyone who wants to look at it, it's not theory anymore. It's been happening at scale, at a huge scale. And it actually provides a blueprint for how a lot of grids around the world can escape this energy trilemma, where they have to make a decision about energy security versus renewability. And Texas shows a blueprint for how you can have both.
Do you have any idea if the price of energy dropped, or because of the high penetration of renewables?
It hasn't dropped, but it hasn't gone up either. And
which is good.
Exactly. So what's happened in Texas, if you look at the inflation-adjusted figures throughout Texas, they're roughly the same, the cost of energy. The total cost of energy has gone up, but that's because you've had a cumulative 20% inflation over a 3-year period across the US. But if you look at inflation-adjusted figures, they've roughly stayed the same through that period, which is positive. Now, one of the criticisms of renewable energy is often that it puts power prices up. And there is some evidence to back that up, because whilst renewable variable energy is cheaper now to produce, that's only true insofar as it's delivering energy to consumers. And what's happened with a lot of government policies has been that subsidies have caused the proliferation of renewable energy. Fantastic. What's less fantastic has been that the subsidies have not incentivized the delivery of power to people who need it. They've simply been to build renewable generation capacity. So where do people build? Well, they build where land is cheap. And where's land cheap? Where there's no people. Can you see the problem here? So you've got renewable energy, which is built miles away from where people are that could use that energy. You've got people in another part of the country, and this happens in Portugal, happens in Spain, happens in Texas, happens in Germany, happens in the Northern Territory of Australia, happens across the world. And then you have these transmission lines, and everyone says, well, we can just transmit that energy. Well,
what's the loss?
No, you can't, because the transmission lines will need upgrading to handle that amount of power. Plus, they will need substation upgrades to be able to handle the variability of that energy. And that costs billions of dollars, decabillions of dollars, huge amounts, which no one really factored in. Same problem in England, where you have all this renewable wind power in Scotland. Fantastic. But where do people live? For the most part, in London, in the south of England, in the center of England. So that's got to travel down these transmission lines, which just simply cannot cope with the volume of wind power that comes down them. So a lot of that renewable energy just simply gets wasted and squandered. And so when it gets wasted or squandered, that's not reaching people. Plus, you've got to supplement it with some other, probably fossil fuel generation, which costs money. So a lot of the theoretical reductions in the cost of energy from renewables have not been delivered, either because of the very costly grid upgrades that are required, or because that a lot of the renewable generation cannot reach people in need. And people have started to realize this, and people are starting to say, hey, our power prices haven't gone up. In fact, they've gone down, and they blamed renewable energy, sometimes rightly, sometimes wrongly, but it's actually not renewable energy that's a problem. It's government policies and subsidies and the way they've been implemented without any thought about where they're located, whether they can deliver power, and whether the transmission lines can handle them, and what the overall cost will be to have that more variable renewable energy on the grid. And plus, what you do if suddenly you don't have access to that power, whether it's a gas peaker plant you have to have, or whether it's Bitcoin mining. Again, very little thought has been put into this. And this is not unique to Europe. It's the same across the world. Give you about 12 different examples where governments have made exactly the same mistakes.
Yeah, but I think the Cornell University study focuses on that part, that the Bitcoin mining can provide some gas. Let's put it in I missed the English word.
Quote marks.
No, it can foster the evolution of, or the evolution. Contribute to the technology on superconductors, or on renewables, and make it cheaper to invest in those remote locations. And maybe you can get more technology innovation on superconductors or whatever to be able to transport the energy for longer distances.
I think that's what's happening with the work of the gridless guys, right? They are being able to provide energy to places where, if it wasn't for Bitcoin mining, you wouldn't have a grid over there. You wouldn't have any energy production.
Yeah, so if you look at the challenges of energy today, there's many challenges. It's centralized, it's subsidized, and we talked about the problems, what happens with subsidies. It's fossilized, and by fossilized, I mean the grid infrastructure is very, very old as well, and it's politicized. And 5, it's incredibly wasteful. There's huge quantities of energy that simply gets wasted. When you transport energy across wires, massive amounts of energy is wasted. And what's reported on is not the true figure. When you have a lot of particularly renewable energy, huge amounts of that get curtailed, get wasted because they're produced at a time of day that other people don't need it. So when we're looking to solutions to these 5 major problems with energy systems today, Bitcoin mining solves a lot of them, which is phenomenal. As we're talking with gridless, when you're looking at rural Africa, a centralized grid is not the solution. It will never be profitable. So decentralized energy systems which work within communities, which deliver power to that community, they're absolutely the option. And Bitcoin mining has provided an economic incentive where they become cost viable, whereas otherwise they simply wouldn't, because there wasn't the demand, as we were talking about before. And then the fossilized architecture of a grid. There was an article recently that showed, this is from Duke University, that as long as you manage the installation of Bitcoin mining on your grid wisely, then a lot of the problems that come out of the burgeoning of AI can be averted. So, for example, there's a major issue with AI and grids in that as you AI, particularly if it's inference AI, wants to be up 24/7, 99.999% of the time. And how do you do that? Not with variable renewable energy. That requires thermal energy, nuclear, gas, coal. Or if it's available, you could use hydro. But in many areas, nuclear and hydro are not available, so you only have fossil fuel, which means that as you put more AI onto the grid, you also need to put more fossil fuel onto the grid to give it that constant power that it demands. And the other problem is that because it's a very inflexible user of energy, then for those little peaks and troughs, you need massive upgrades to the grid. Whereas if you could just shave either end, like the lower extreme and the higher extreme of the demand, then suddenly you don't need to upgrade your grid anymore. So what's happening with some of these AI companies is they're looking to form relationships with grid operators. The grid operators saying, well, we want your revenue, but we don't want the grid upgrade cost. We don't want the burden of having to put more fossil fuel on the grid. And we want you to be more flexible. And the Bitcoin mining companies are going to AI companies saying, well, we can help you achieve that. If 2% of your power draw is Bitcoin mining, then suddenly you go from being an inflexible user to a flexible user of electricity, which means you can get a contract with the grid operator. You can, the grid operator does no longer have to upgrade their grid. And so you avoid these very costly upgrades to a fossilized grid architecture. So, I mean, the advantages are they're across the board. It's no one area. And the interesting thing you said is a lot of this is counterintuitive, because on the surface of it, people see Bitcoin mining data centers and they say AI data centers and they say, well, they all use energy, they're all bad, but AI has a use, Bitcoin doesn't, so I'm okay with AI, I'm not okay with Bitcoin. And that's a level of sophistication, and myself included, that a lot of people have in making these judgments. And sometimes you're right in snap judgments, but sometimes you're wrong. There are some things in life where the truth is counterintuitive. And the deeper you dig, you find out that Bitcoin mining companies and AI data centers are not alike at all. Bitcoin mining, because it is a flexible user of energy, the more you have on that in the grid, the more variable renewable energy you can put on the grid. The more AI you put on the grid, the more fossil fuel you have to put on the grid. So they're not the same. And we're not going to get into today, but that assumption that AI is valuable because I can see the use of it, but Bitcoin isn't because I haven't yet found the use of it. Well, again, a lot of the use of Bitcoin is non-apparent, and a lot of the judgments about it being wasteful come from the assumption that it has no use other than as a speculative asset. But that's only down to the fact that we're relying on information sources to tell us the use. Just because the information sources we go to haven't told us the use doesn't mean it doesn't have one. In fact, the more we dig, we find about 21 incredible uses of Bitcoin, many of which are felt outside the West, which is the reason that a lot of people don't see it. So these statements such as Bitcoin is wasteful, often they come in ignorance, often they come through failure to see the true utility of a technology, and it's a value judgment by definition. So we have to go beyond this and start to look deeper and start to understand technologies before we indict them so quickly. That's incredibly important.
So a quick question, Daniel. You mentioned, you mentioned AI data centers and Bitcoin miners. Can you tell us a little bit about like what are the difference between those in terms of its potential to absorb any potential energy access? Any excess of energy production that you might have momentarily?
AI data centers cannot play that role at the moment. They're not a flexible user of energy. Bitcoin mining companies, however, can play it in both directions. So what you can do with a Bitcoin mining company, so you're talking about two things. Number one, you can power down very fast, but you're hinting at something else, which is also true. You can also power up. So say, for example, there's a surplus of energy and you want to do something with that surplus. Well, you're not going to have a whole lot of GPUs just sitting idle doing nothing at an AI data center. That's not going to happen. They'll all really be operating at capacity, but you will have older Bitcoin mining units at a Bitcoin mining company. So you have these two divisions. You have these newer Bitcoin mining rigs that are mining all the time, apart from when the grid operator asks you to power down to stabilize the grid. And then you have a second bunch, which is slightly older, less efficient miners that may be 5 years plus, maybe 5 to 8 years old. And these last generation miners, it doesn't make sense to mine all the time because they're inefficient. So you'll paying more in energy than you'll be getting back in Bitcoin. However, when wholesale electricity prices drop, there's a certain point at which it becomes cost effective to fire them up. Now, when do wholesale electricity prices drop? That's when there's an oversupply of generation and prices drop to disincentivize people to send power to the grid and to incentivize people to consume power. Because remember, that can cause grid instability as well. So when the prices drop, you've got these algorithms which are defining the exact point of wholesale electricity at which it makes sense to fire up these Bitcoin miners, and it drops and boom, it'll hit that point, and then automatically these mining units will suddenly fire up because they're going, hey, it's profitable to mine now. And not only is that good for the Bitcoin mining company, but it's actually really good for the grid because it helps to stabilize it. Because the alternative is, for example, you might have had to pay a wind generator to curtail their energy, which is bad for two reasons. Number one, you don't want to be curtailing wind because you continuously switch off and on those turbines. It creates wear and tear on the blades. But also, the grid operator has to pay a penalty to the renewable generator for not taking their power. And ultimately, that cost gets borne by the end consumers. So if you have someone who can use that power, you avoid the curtailment fees, you avoid wear and tear on the turbines. Bitcoin mining company is happy. The wind company is happy because they get a user of that power. They don't have to curtail. The grid operator is happy because they don't have to pay curtailment fees. And the end users of energy are happy because that cost of curtailing renewable energy is not passed on to end consumers.
That's really interesting. I never thought about that. Like plugging in old miners. It's really interesting because what I thought, reflecting on all of this, was a situation where eventually you would have, so you would be mining during the day with solar, and then eventually on the night with wind or something like that. Where you would combine both of them to minimize downtime. Something like that. But yeah, I never thought about this idea of just using old machines to just basically absorb the excess production, because like you said, it doesn't make any sense to have the newest machines, right, and to have them not running all the time.
Yeah. And the other thing you can do is you can co-locate these operations actually on a solar farm or on a wind farm. And this is really important because I don't know what it's like in Portugal, but in the UK right now, you have these things called grid interconnection queues, where you have a lot of renewable energy that wants to come onto the grid. But the problem is the renewable energy that's already on the grid is not reaching people a lot of the time. And so the grid operator is going, well, we can't take any more renewable power. We can't counterbalance it. The grid needs to be upgraded as it is. And already a lot of it's been wasted. So you get these queues that go right out to like 2040, sometimes even 2050. Before more renewable capacity can get onto the grid. Now, part of the reason for that is that they're not going to be profitable. And because they're not going to be profitable, then you can't get someone to finance them. So someone like me who works in infrastructure, I don't work with solar. I work with people who are using stranded energy on landfills. But if I were, and I was looking at a solar operator or a new solar facility that wanted to open up, the first question I'd say is, okay, how long is it going to take you to get grid interconnected? It's going to take me 4 years. It's going to take me 10 years. Okay, well, that's a lot of cost before you get any payback. What's the guarantee you will get grid interconnected at all? Well, that's low. Okay, it's not sounding so good so far. Well, what do you do in the meantime? Who's your customer? Well, we don't have any. We don't have a grid interconnection. Well, there's no way I'm going to give finance to you. Now, you insert a Bitcoin mining company in the equation. Now you come to me and you say, okay, here's our proposition. Okay, when are you going to get grid interconnected? Same year. Okay. What's the probability? Same. Okay, it's not sounding good. What are you going to do in the meantime? But now you've got a better answer. You say, well, before we get grid interconnected, we have a permanent customer, which is Bitcoin mining, who can take our power, because they will co-locate on our wind farm, on our solar farm, and they will use our energy directly for years before we even get connected to the grid, which means if you look at our curve here, you can see that we start to pay ourselves off even before we get grid interconnected. I'm saying, okay, I'm liking this. This is sounding better. And number two, because you now have a profitable business venture, that means you're more likely that the grid operator is going to be able to take you on. Plus, because you now have load balancing as part of your equation, because you can switch on and off that renewable, or rather you can switch on and off the Bitcoin mining. Now, I'm not just taking on more variable renewable energy and passing on that headache of load balancing to the grid operator. I'm now a renewable generation facility that has developed my own solution to load balancing. So I'm offering a solution to the grid because I can be part of that same program to curtail the draw of power by switching on and off my Bitcoin mining companies. So I'm more likely to get connected to the grid. I'm more likely to be prioritized. I've got more money while I'm waiting. Suddenly that renewable project is more likely to get onto the grid. And then the second thing that happens is that once you're on the grid, you can handle more variable renewable energy. Now, I was talking to a guy who's been doing this for a long time. He worked initially with nuclear in Japan. When Japan shut down a lot of its nuclear reactors following the Fukushima disaster, when they went from 56 nuclear reactors down to 14, they had to make up that shortfall very fast. And they did it in two ways. Number one, they imported a lot of fossil fuel. And number two, they started to build their own renewable capacity. And probably mostly it was the former and just less of the latter. And he started to observe firsthand these challenges with curtailed energy, with grid instability that were caused when you had renewable generation without adequate load balancing. And he experimented with Bitcoin mining, and he's been doing this for a number of years. And the conclusion he came to, he said, when you have a grid and you're putting more variable renewable energy onto it, you can get up to about 50% penetration, and then you run out of options. It's hard to go beyond 50% solar and wind. He said, however, if you're using Bitcoin mining to load balance that intermittency, you can go right up to around 70%. So Bitcoin mining is providing two incredibly important functions here. Number one, it's helping more renewable energy get onto the grid, and this is exactly what we've seen in Texas. This is not theory, this is history. And secondly, once it's on the grid, and again, this is not theory, this is history, it counterbalances the intermittency of renewables, which means you can continue to grow renewable capacity on the grid. So it's not simply that it's a nice to have, it's doing something that is unique that no other solution can offer. Sure, you've got pumped hydro, sure, you've got green hydrogen, sure, you've got batteries. All of them have the utility, their time and place. But they can't do it for the same cost. They're not as modular, and they can't do it at the same scale. And often they can't get a grid from 50 right up to 70% in a very short amount of time without massive expenses. So that's the real unique advantage that Bitcoin mining companies have.
It's awesome to see how Bitcoin fixes things, not even in a financial meaning or economical. Well, economical, yes, but a financial meaning, not in the meaning of a currency or no. It's like a tool for grid operators.
I wouldn't be surprised if the revolution that Bitcoin causes to energy is as big as the revolution it causes to money, because it's solving problems across multiple different fronts because of its incredible flexibility and this unique accident that it's not only flexible but very energy hungry, which means it's incentivized to seek out cheap energy. That you're going to see a lot of fundamental problems with energy, with renewable energy, and with maintaining increasing energy security and greening our grid at the same time, that will be solved in part because of Bitcoin mining.
So a quick question for you, Daniel. In terms of the future of energy and Bitcoin mining, how do you see it play out? Do you think energy companies will eventually buy miners? I don't know if you spoke with politicians, people that have the power, right, to direct which policies they will pursue. What has been their reaction so far? I don't know if you have any tips, for instance, for us as Portuguese to try and reach out for the energy company here that is responsible for the grid. Any feedback from us?
Yeah, so convergence is happening in both directions. Yeah, so you're seeing what you're talking about is convergence between Bitcoin mining and energy. And yes, you're right, it's happening. It's already happening, and it's happening in both directions. So firstly, you're seeing Bitcoin mining companies that are becoming energy companies. So for example, Mara, who recently bought a 114 megawatt wind farm. And the reason they bought that is exactly what we're talking about. It's for their older miners because it's an intermittent source. So they have their older miners functioning off 100% wind power. And then when the grid needs that additional energy from the grid, the energy can be delivered back to the grid. So they're also providing grid stabilization services. So that's one example. And why are they doing that? They're doing that so that they can control their destiny. So rather than be at the mercy of wholesale energy price fluctuations or increase in the cost of energy, they own the asset. So they effectively, once they have amortized the cost of that wind farm, they're getting zero marginal cost energy. So that's the first reason. And that's a Bitcoin mining company becoming an energy company. The opposite is happening where you have energy companies that are becoming Bitcoin mining companies. So this is like TEPCO or like Deutsche Telekom, where they're saying, hang on, we've got all this surplus variable renewable energy. We're just wasting it. They run a few simple models and they go, we'd be crazy not to do Bitcoin mining because by not mining Bitcoin, we are wasting vast amounts of energy. And so they become Bitcoin mining companies because now they're not wasting energy. They're not curtailing energy anymore. They're monetizing it. So you're seeing the convergence happening from both directions. And in terms of how you get grid operators and state-owned utilities involved, it's really about explaining how it solves problems. So you don't lead with Bitcoin. You don't talk about sound money. The grid operator in Texas, he wasn't a Bitcoiner. He didn't understand the value proposition of Bitcoin obviating gold as a store of value or banks as a medium of exchange. He didn't have to.
He just wants a solution, right?
He just wanted a solution. And so for him, so here's what happened. The Winter Storm Uri had happened. He was tasked. He came in after the old grid operator was fired. He was brought out of retirement and he looked at a few different solutions. He looked at gas peaker plants. He looked at weatherizing existing equipment. And then he looked at this new thing called Bitcoin mining. And to start with, he was pretty skeptical. It's like, what's this thing? How's this going to help? And then people explained, well, it's actually really flexible. He's like, flexible's good. Tell me more. Okay. Well, it's very modular and you can actually power it down to the exact level that you want. He said, that's good. Tell me more. He said, well, it can also stay off for a long time. Like it's not like a gas plant, rather an aluminium smelter, or a steel plant, which after 4 hours, industrial processes harden and they want to use power again, they can stay off for 4 days, 3 days. He's saying, this sounds good. Let me find out more about it. And the more he found out about it, he realized this was the most flexible consumer of energy he'd ever had. And that he didn't need to spend up to $18 billion investing in new gas peaker plants to help load balance the grid. He could do it purely through Bitcoin mining, and he didn't have to pay a cent because those were privately owned companies. So the only cost to the grid operator was the cost they already would have had, which is when you have a demand response program, there are a bunch of different users who basically earn money by powering down. It's a service that's existed for 20 years. Normally it's done by steel plants or aluminium smelters. But now Bitcoin mining companies can compete to offer that grid stabilization to power down. Now, when you have more people competing at an auction to be paid to deliver that service, the price of that service goes down. So it's actually reduced the amount of cost to deliver demand response while increasing the flexibility of demand response because it's more modular, more instant, and more long-term. So he became an absolute raving super fan for Bitcoin mining, even though he was not a Bitcoiner, and was a constant evangelist for it. And what we're finding is that the grid operators who are open to it, they find that it actually solves core needs. So I'd say work out where the challenges are, and then just show them how Bitcoin mining will solve them one by one. And the truth's on your side. I mean, these, as I say, these things are not theoretical anymore. They're sure, you've got the academic white papers and the peer-reviewed research, but more importantly that you've got actual case studies of this being done at scale with multiple different utilities and multiple different renewable suppliers, multiple different grid operators around the world, all saying the same thing in concert, which is stabilizes grids, it monetizes stranded energy. And if you go even further afield, it also monetizes wasted energy from landfills and from oil fields that otherwise would have resulted in greenhouse gases in the form of methane going into the air.
I was told that the secret to have a seat on the table is just to not mention Bitcoin mining at all. You just say like flexible data centers.
It's irrelevant.
You get the meeting, and then you said.
Yeah. Well, what it's doing and what you call it is irrelevant to the grid operator. It's just it's what you call it an FLC. It's a flexible load consumer, and it's the most flexible load consumer that they ever will have seen.
Yeah. At the end of the day, it's all about sales, right? It's about
it's about solving problems. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
and
unfortunately, when it comes to Bitcoin, people they have these psychological biases, right, against it, and we have to like find out all these tricks in order for people to listen to us. Unfortunately,
don't mention it. Just mention you have a flexible.
Yeah, that's what I was saying. Just.
I see it a little differently because I don't even see it as a trick. I see it as just, look, when you're communicating with people, part of the art form is you only tell them what's relevant to them. I think one of the most benevolent things you can do is to say, can I serve you? What is your problem? Do I have a solution? And just to listen, to see whether you have a solution or not. And then you only tell them the parts of what you know about that are relevant to their solution. So it becomes self-fulfilling. Whereas if you do a good job of listening, you find out what their problems are, then automatically 97% of the things you could have said about Bitcoin and Bitcoin mining, you don't need to say because they're not relevant to the solution. And you only answer the 3 or 4 things, the features of Bitcoin mining that are relevant to the problems that they've told you that they have. So it already starts with listening. So I think that's always the approach that I've used. How can I be of service? Being curious, doing a good job of listening, and keeping my mouth shut about the things I might love to talk about, but they don't love to hear about.
Okay. I don't know if you guys have any more questions. Actually, I have another one, Daniel. When it comes to heat recapture, what's your take on it? Do you think there's a potential over there? I heard that you have the heat pumps.
Yeah, so, a year ago, I would have said, watch the space. It's interesting. It's fascinating. Now, I've seen so many examples. When I was in Europe recently, I was in Portugal, I was in France, and I was in the UK, and I met with a lot of people who are now, they're Bitcoin mining companies, but what they're doing, just for the benefit of people who are listening, is that almost 100% of the energy that comes through a Bitcoin miner gets converted into heat. So the good news there is that 50% of the world's energy is used for heating. Now, sure, some of it's melting silicon or melting steel, so it's not going to be enough heat to do that, but it can deliver heat for things such as residential heating, residential hot water heating, drying out timber, tropical fish farming, heating up swimming pools. There's a number of particularly quite common uses, or heating up in warehouses, that you can redeploy that heat to, and that's starting to happen at scale. So I think this is a very exciting area because, again, the cool thing about that is, once again, you're obviating the need for fossil fuel-based heating systems with electricity-based systems. And this is part of how we achieve decarbonization of global energy systems. We have to do 2 things. Number 1, we have to electrify as much as we can, replace fossil fuel with electrification. And number 2, we have to make sure that the source of that electricity is as green as possible. If we can do those 2 things, then we've achieved a lot. And Bitcoin mining is already earning Bitcoin through mining, But in addition, it can be heating. And I think we're going to see some massive innovations in that area over the next decade. Already, 2% of Finland is having its entire district heating delivered by the exhaust heat from Bitcoin mining.
Yeah, I use an old miner, an S9 for heating. I just plug it in.
Just makes sense.
In the winter, yeah. If I would have a heater anyway, consuming energy, so why not just do
Exactly.
it?
Exactly.
Do the two things, right? And I think it's interesting, and a lot of innovation will come from this. So I use an old machine that's been probably thrown away from the Chinese, but I think with more innovation, you will get proper eaters or
Oh, it's already happening. Yeah, there's
Yeah.
companies right now who are selling them as actual heaters. The guy I met, he's from a company called 21 Energy, Austrian. He was living in the Alps. He still lives in the Alps. And every winter, he was spending a phenomenal amount on heating. And the source of that heating was fossil fuel.
Yeah.
So he was going through, I think, 1,500 liters, something crazy. He was spending $4,000 on heating every single year. And then he noticed he was doing some Bitcoin mining at home, and he's saying, hang on a minute, this produces heat. I wonder if, and that wonder if led him on this path of discovery. So what he did is he repurposed, he bought a whole lot of Bitcoin mining. He paid for it through his home residential electricity bill. So the Bitcoin mining was not profitable. He was paying more for electricity than he was getting back in Bitcoin, right? He was losing $1,000. So why would he do that? The reason he did that was he removed his $4,000 heating bill. So he wasn't down $1,000. He was up $3,000 every single year. Plus, he'd moved to a cleaner energy source because he was now using grid mix as opposed to 100% fossil fuel. And out of that, he's saying, hang on a minute, there's a lot of people in Austria who need heating. There's a lot of people in Europe who need heating. And his company's been growing at 300% for 3 years straight because of the huge need for this form of heating, which is meeting decarbonization goals plus energy efficiency goals. This is what I'm talking about. At the same time, you don't have to make that choice anymore. And I think that's the real feature of Bitcoin mining. You add it to the mix. You're not in this dilemma of, do I choose the greener solution or the cost-effective solution? You have both.
Yeah. It's awesome.
Yeah. However, I heard that, for instance, for southern countries, since the temperatures are hotter in general, the heat pump, it's a more economical solution. Is that true, Daniel? Have you had a look at it? Like compared to because for instance in the Alps it's colder, right? So it's more advantageous economically to run a miner. But from what I heard, in the southern countries, in hotter countries, it's not the case. Maybe I'm wrong. I don't know. That's something that I heard. Can you?
You could be right. I mean, you've got to look at it on a case by case basis and look at what your heating bill is. Yeah, if you're in a warmer country, like in Costa Rica, it's not going to work. I don't need heating at all, right? So doing Bitcoin mining is going to be a waste of money for me because I'm going to be spending more on electricity at home than I'll be getting through Bitcoin. So if I can't repurpose that heat for something else, it's wasted. So then the equation becomes, well, okay, I can't use it for heating my home, but what could I use it for? Well, I could use it for heating water. I still like to have hot showers. I still like to use hot water for my dishes. So how could I use it for water heating? And that's a solution. Okay, we've got a swimming pool, a condo they live in. Well, what if that could be heated? And so this is where you get innovation that comes in. Okay, it doesn't make economic sense to do it for this, but it might make economic sense to do it for that.
Yeah, I was saying this because from what I know, a heat pump consists of transferring the heat right from the cold area to the hot area. And since in hotter areas there is not that much cold, it's not as efficient. But I mean, I guess I'll have to dig in it again and do a little bit extra research on this.
Have a look at 21 Energy. Have a chat to the guy. I'm sure he's looked into the analysis of different parts of Europe.
Okay. Any more questions, guys?
I have one last one. So, what does the future hold for us when it comes to Bitcoin and the energy sector? How do we end up in 20 years from now? Can you make some major
Yeah,
predictions?
do you think energy will be priced in sets in the coming future, or like?
Well, the first thing I'll say is I have absolutely no idea what the future holds, because it's impossible, and small deviations in trend lines can lead to completely different scenarios. However, based on some things we know with certainty, we can say what we think is more likely. And what we think is going to be much more likely is, number one, that Bitcoin in the future will become more decentralized. We'll be using more stranded energy, more wasted energy than ever before. It'll be predominantly wasted renewable energy or methane mitigation from oil fields or from landfills, possibly from farms as well. So this will become more common, and it'll have to become more common because the profitability of mining goes down over time as you have each subsequent halving, as the hash rate of the network goes up, and those two events we suspect will be too much to counterbalance the price rise. So mining becomes less profitable. You have to look for secondary revenue sources. That's going to come from heat recycling. It's going to come from also selling demand response services to the grid. But also the other thing Bitcoin mining companies will do, they'll look for cheaper and cheaper energy. So that's more stranded energy, more wasted energy, which tends to be renewable. So that we know with certainty. And we also know that Bitcoin mining is solving problems for AI data centers and for energy companies. So we can also expect much more convergence between AI and Bitcoin and between the energy sector in Bitcoin.
I think that's what you're trying to explore with your company, right? All those
And
possibilities.
And we're a small part of that because we've seen the future, and we've seen that there's again, Bitcoin solves this problem where you have a lot of stranded energy on landfills. Sometimes you can convert that into power and sell it to the grid, but for at least half the world's landfills, you can't do that. It's purely stranded. And the only thing profitable that makes sense to do with it is to do Bitcoin mining with it, because they're the only ones who have such a large power bill, because it's 80% of your operating budget, that it's worth paying all that extra capex to put in gas capture and collection systems and spend a lot of money on $1 million a generator for a megawatt generator and get 4 of them and spend all that money on the additional cost of just getting the energy, but they'll get a payback because they get such cheap energy as a result that it'll pay itself off over a short period of time.
Yeah, so, even in a environmental issue, it's even better because you are taking or not releasing the methane onto the air, and you are converting it to carbon.
It's one of the fastest ways that you can mitigate methane emissions because you don't need any government incentives, and you can do it on landfills that are venting. We were literally looking at one landfill 3 days ago, which is emitting the equivalent of 6 million tons of CO2 equivalents. That's the same as the entire nation of Estonia or Nepal or Cyprus emits as a nation, and this is a single landfill. That's how much carbon equivalents it's emitting every single
day. Bitcoin can capture that.
Bitcoin can capture it and convert it into gas, and you mitigate those carbon emissions at scale at the same time as basically for the landfill owner, you solve a problem. You turn an environmental liability into money for the landfill owner because they get paid for the power. The Bitcoin mining company gets cheap power. We come in as the infrastructure financing company, and we get a return on our investment through the loan finance on those Bitcoin mining rigs and the gas collection. So the environment wins, the Bitcoin mining company wins, we win, landfill owner wins. There's no one who loses here. So that's a sort of problem that a Bitcoin mining company can uniquely solve because of that unique combination of being a very flexible modular energy consumer and having very high energy demand.
Yeah.
I actually, when it comes to losing, you said no one was losing with this transition. Well, we know the Bitcoin mining is deflationary to energy prices. We also have deflation from technology advancement. Um, I just saw your profile, and I see you're a advisory board member for Marathon Digital Holdings, which is one of the largest Bitcoin miners in the Americas. Also, there's some news in this space that artificial intelligence is taking out some jobs. I see you have 2 job openings for Marathon, which are kind of new. We're seeing Bitcoin miner technicians and mining protocol interns. So is Bitcoin creating new jobs? And while AI is taking others, what do you think? Well, when it comes to the job market, do you think this fourth revolution we're talking about with
I see
AI, Bitcoin, energy?
Bitcoin mining is creating a lot of jobs, and some of them are definitely in the data centers themselves, but that's not a lot. It doesn't doesn't provide a lot of jobs. That's the reality, because a lot of it can be managed remotely in many cases, depending on the size of the operation. Where I see there's going to be a lot more jobs created is with R&D, is with companies that are doing heat recycling, that are using Bitcoin mining, on landfills or in places that are solving these tough problems. Or, for example, there's a guy in Hawaii right now who is reviving a mothballed form of renewable energy called OTEC, which is harnessing the temperature fluctuations between the surface temperature in tropical regions and the deep down temperature, and using that to drive a turbine. But then he doesn't have an off-taker for the power, but he can actually put the Bitcoin mining rigs on the sea barges, which means he doesn't have to tether put a cable to deliver the power back to the mainland initially. Eventually they will. It means they can go around avoiding the hurricanes. So it reduces the costs, which means he can go through that R&D phase. So again, that's something that can create not just a lot of innovation, but a lot of new jobs. And so I'm seeing tremendous areas of innovation and these secondary applications of Bitcoin mining. That's where I see there's going to be more jobs created for the community. And I've been around a little while. I mean, you got to remember, I was around in the dot-com days. I saw what happened even with the computer when it first took off. And I saw the same things, that people were concerned that computers would do people out of jobs. And then they were concerned that it was going to be digital devices. And then they were concerned it's going to be AI. But in each case, what you really see is you see a certain type of job being obviated and a new type of job being created. And I think that's going to be exactly the same with AI. And it'll be the same. I think I can't see that Bitcoin mining is going to do people out of jobs, but I can definitely see it'll create some new ones that didn't exist in the past.
I think we saw it. I think we saw it with cars, with lights.
I think it will do people out of jobs, actually. Yeah, it probably will, because as Bitcoin starts to take off as an asset, then it's going to do people out of jobs who've been earning a lot of money in remittance payments as middlemen. It's going to, you won't, as it starts to obviate gold as a store of value. There's reduced need for gold mining. So yeah, we'll do certain people out of jobs. It'll do central bankers out of jobs. It'll do a lot of people in financial services out of jobs who've been invited not to buy Bitcoin for the last 20 years. So yeah, it will create some jobs that get obviated, and that's probably why Bitcoin's been attacked so much, because the people who are threatened with obviation, the ones who are saying the loudest that Bitcoin is terrible, for a number of different reasons. So yeah, it will create some job losses, but then it also, like I say, it'll create some new jobs, which I think are going to be very valuable to society.
Yep.
We'll get rid of inefficient jobs, parasite jobs, and it will provide proof of work jobs.
It'll allow those people who've been in those sectors to do things which offer more value to humanity.
Yeah, exactly.
Nice way to put it. Well,
you want to say? Yeah.
And I think even the central bankers, the ones who get it's like Kodak versus Fujifilm. Two companies who both saw the digital camera. One pretended it didn't exist. Fujifilm innovated, and they still exist and are a thriving company. So it'll be the same with the central banking industry. You'll have the ones who are the dinosaurs, who pretend it's not there, who try to FUD it till their dying days, and they'll be the Kodaks. And then you'll have the ones who actually embrace it and who innovate. And I think it'll be the same with Bitcoin as well.
Yeah, hopefully it will. You want to say something, Abjad? No, you're going to ask another question, or you're going to close it out?
No, I think. Well, I came up with this question while listening to Daniel, but yeah, I think we've come to the end. I want to thank all of you. I want to thank Daniel. I think this was our first contact. I was there in Madeira with you, but I didn't get the chance to speak with you. But I hope, fortunately, we find another way, another time to talk. But yeah, thank you for coming to to our little Portuguese podcast, and I'll see you soon. Then
Look forward to it.
Yeah. Thank you, Daniel. Thank you for your work. It has been very important, especially to clarify a lot of FUD that has been thrown around, especially by the Dutch guy Nick de Vries. Right? It was the Patient Zero that started this whole disinformation campaign against Bitcoin mining, and your work, what you've been doing, has been tremendous in order to help us clarify and, like I said, get rid of all this information that has been around for too long. Yeah.
Team effort. There's a lot of people doing it, and I'm just happy to be one of them who's just helping to bring truth to the surface.
Yeah, I think each one of us has a role, right? In its own area, on its own sphere of influence, and we can all help a little bit, as much as we can, to make the world a better place, and hopefully to contribute to Bitcoin's success. Okay, I guess we can wrap it up. Tiago, any final thoughts? No,
I want to thank Daniel. It was a really, really cool talk, and I learned a lot. Thank you.
Thanks, guys.
Bye.
Boa noite a todos. Até uma próxima. E é isso. Fiquem à espera.